Welcome to the Empowered and In Control podcast, the podcast that helps people who have been impacted by domestic abuse to heal and regain power and control after an abusive relationship. I'm your host, Oriana, your favorite domestic violence expert, speaker, and the owner of To Rise Advocacy and Consulting. All right, loves, it is February, so happy Black History Month. I hope you are celebrating all the richness of the culture and all of the contributions made. And I hope you're celebrating from the 1st through the 28th, okay? All month long. But I did want to mention that in addition to it being Black History Month, it's also Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Did you know that? Well, now you do, so let's get into it. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported that 57% of students who reported dating abuse experienced it in college. And 20 to 30% experienced some form of physical aggression. So this would be the slapping and hitting and punching that we typically think of when we think of physical abuse. But 8 to 16% reported some type of severe physical aggression. So this could be strangulation, for example, which if you didn't have the chance to take a look at the episode that we did on strangulation with Dr. Amanda Taylor, I highly recommend that you check that out after this episode. Now, 70 to 90%, and I'll give that stat again, 70 to 90% experience some form of psychological aggression. This could be the name calling, the insults, the mind games, the gaslighting, right? But 12 to 30% said that they experienced some form of severe psychological aggression. And so this could be threats of harm, whether it was threats of suicide or threats to hurt their partner. It could also include destruction of property. Now, a lot of people don't think of destruction of property as a form of psychological aggression, but if you think about it, if somebody punches the wall right beside your head and then tells you that they were doing you a kindness because they didn't connect it to your face, that's a form of psychological aggression, right? You're basically telling that person that I could have done this to you, but I did it to your property instead. And it's usually the victim's property that is destroyed and not their own. So 3 to 20% said that they experienced some form of sexual aggression, and this could have been threats of sexual assault. But 3 to 9% said that they experienced some form of severe sexual aggression. And these may be the cases that there was actually a use of force. Now, breakthecycle.org said that many students are uninformed, with 57% finding it difficult to identify dating abuse. 38% don't know how to get help for themselves, and 58% wouldn't know how to help a friend if they were in that situation. So let's break each one of these down, okay? Let's start with difficulty in identifying dating abuse. So in addition to the obvious physical abuse, there are other abusive behaviors that can be disguised as love and concern, but they're really symptoms of jealousy and control. So things like jealousy itself, that's not cute. I hate to be the one to tell people, but that's not cute. That is literally a form of insecurity and desired control disguised as concern. And especially when that's coupled with accusations of cheating. Even when no cheating has ever occurred, that is just a tactic that's used, and it's born out of insecurity. What about checking your phone or checking your location without permission? Or as I like to call it, stalking, right? If someone is tracking your location and constantly checking in with you or checking your phone, wanting your password, all those things, again, they may say that they're doing it out of concern, but they're really doing it as a form of control. My personal belief is if someone doesn't trust me, or if I don't trust someone enough that I feel like I have to go through their phone, then I don't need to be with that person because the trust isn't there. And that's one of the most important things. And then another big behavior that we really need to look at is coercion. Coercion can take many forms. Uh, we'll talk about it in terms of getting people trying to get their way. So when it comes to sex, it could be that someone is using arguments or guilt tripping you in order to convince you to have sex, even if you don't want to. And to avoid argument, to avoid being made to feel bad, you just give in. Well, that's not true consent. And so you are coerced into that. And the same thing could be for going out with your friends or going to visit with family or anything that your partner is telling you, you don't need to do this, I don't like it, whatever the case may be. They're saying that partially because they know that you'll give in if they make a big enough deal about it. That's coercion. For those who don't know how to get help for themselves, it can be a little tricky for those who are under the age of 18. So what I typically tell people is that there should be a trusted, safe adult that helps with that process. Hopefully it would be a parent or guardian. It could be a trusted school counselor or teacher, but there should be some trusted adult that should be able to assist in the process of getting advocacy services, to file for an order of protection, or to even file criminal charges or file a police report if that's necessary. Now, I live in Tennessee, and so everyone in the state of Tennessee are mandated reporters, which means if there is a child, a minor that is experiencing domestic abuse or any type of abuse at all, we are mandated, it is required that we report that, whether that's to Department of Children's Services, Child Protective Services, whatever it's called in your area. So if there is a young person under the age of 18 that reports to you that they're experiencing some form of abuse, depending on the state that you're in, if you're in a state that has mandated reporting, you're supposed to report that. Now, I would say that needs to be coupled with resources, right? That has to come with some safety planning and figuring out who the person is that is committing the abuse and what the safe way about going about that would be. That's the reason for including domestic violence advocacy groups and or shelters in that process. Now, for those who are above the age of 18, the process is still the same in terms of seeking help from an advocacy group or a shelter who have advocates that can help walk you through that process of what are the services that are available to you, what are the resources that are available, helping you to safety plan, helping you to go through the process of going through the order of protection and what it would look like to file a police report if that's necessary. But also for those students who are in college, colleges have a Title IX director or department that handles situations like that on campus. If there are situations between students where there's some form of abuse or stalking or harassment, sexual assault, any of those things, that department is supposed to handle those complaints. And so for my young adults who are a little older than college age now, that was one of the things that when they started college, I wanted to make sure that we knew who the victim service providers were, like who the advocates on campus were, who the Title IX director is, or where that office is. Be familiar with those things already so that, God forbid, if something happened to them or to their friends, they would know who to go to. Okay, let's talk about bystander empowerment. So for those who say, I wouldn't know how to help my friend if they're in that situation, or my friend is possibly in that situation and I don't know what to do. Some of the signs or some of the ways that you may be able to tell if your friend is in an abusive relationship is if they've become more withdrawn, if they isolate and only spend time with their partner. Also, if their self-esteem seems to have decreased, that's a sign as well. And if a lot of their decisions center around their partner, that's something to be aware of as well. It's different when it's, the beginning stages of a relationship, and everybody's trying to put their best foot forward and spend as much time together as possible, and it's new and it's great. But if that continues and the focus on the partner is all consuming, and they're missing class, they are not going out with their friends, they're not doing the things that they typically do, and they seem to be blaming themselves for things and having a lot of negative self-talk, those are red flags that your friend may be in an abusive relationship. Now, here are some tips on things that you can do. In addition to supporting them in going through those processes, right, that we talked about in terms of getting an advocate, talking to someone, a trusted adult, I'll just encourage you to be supportive and not judgmental. Sometimes it can really make people withdraw even more when you're talking so bad about this person that they still love, even though they're being mistreated. They have an attachment to this person. So just be careful how you talk about their partner. I would also say don't take it personally. That's one of the first things that I learned when I got into advocacy. They taught us that you shouldn't take it personally. There are stages of change that people have to go through where some people don't even recognize what they're in as being a problem. And then there are those who recognize it being a problem, but they're not really sure that they want to do anything about it or what they should do about it. And so there are those stages that people go through, and it's not, step by step. They will flow back and forth through that. So don't take it personally if you're trying to help and it seems like they're not receptive to it. If you're planting seeds and you're being supportive and you're letting them know that you will be there, then when they get to a point when they are ready for change and they are ready to do the actions that go along with that, then they'll remember some of the things that you said. I would also say, understand that trauma also affects decision making. I'll give you an example. I had a very dear friend who has since passed away. She passed away last year, and we talked about her experience with abuse in her previous marriage. And she talked about how she never realized that, once she was out of that relationship and had moved on, when she had her house built, she had a lot of windows put in. I mean, the whole front part of her house and even on the sides, there were glass doors, there were big bay windows. It was a very bright and cheery house. But she realized that because she felt confined and trapped when she was in that marriage, subconsciously, that trauma caused her to want windows and several doors that she could get out of. Now, that hurts, even just to say it now, but it's an example of trauma. I'll give you another example. With my young adults, we had a situation where somebody was on our back porch at one point, and that was a pretty traumatic situation, especially for them being as young as they were. Well, when we went looking for houses, they didn't want houses with a lot of windows and doors because their words, verbatim, too many points of entry. You see the difference? Depending on the trauma, it informs your decision making. So keep that in mind when it comes to your friend who's going through this situation, which this may not be the only type of abuse that they've experienced. That trauma that they're experiencing is going to dictate what they decide to do and how they decide to do it. Again, being supportive. I'm not saying that you may not get frustrated, because that is a very natural human emotion when you care about someone and want them to get out of the situation. But I am saying that you're going to have to look at it from a trauma-informed lens to know that trauma has a lot to do with the decision making, and that you'll have to try to reinforce what healthy relationships look like, what healthy dialogue and communication looks like. Reinforce those things, because it'll kind of bump heads with what they're going through right now. And they'll have to, at some point, decide, do I want to keep going through this, or do I want this type of healthy relationship that my friend keeps reminding me of? Try to model that behavior, or surround yourselves with people who are in, really good, healthy relationships, because that's a good support group for that person, where it's not just you as the only person who's trying to support. Okay. Now let's talk about why this is so important. Why are we talking about domestic abuse or teen dating violence among young people? Well, as with any other groups of people who are experiencing domestic abuse, it has severe impact. So it can impact people through their mental health, with increased rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD. The physical health, that could be increased blood pressure. It could be the chronic pain, in addition to the injuries that they may have. And then there are higher rates of STIs, things like that, risky sexual behavior, other things that come along with that when it comes to the physical health. And then there's substance use disorder. There are a lot of people who use substances to um, serve as a coping mechanism for the trauma that they're experiencing. As a matter of fact, when it comes to young people, teens that are experiencing domestic abuse are 3 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder as a coping mechanism. Teens experiencing dating violence are 3 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder as a coping mechanism to deal with the emotional and physical pain of the trauma that they're experiencing. So we have to talk about these things because of the impact that it's having on young people. It's affecting their academics in terms of whether or not they're going to class, whether they're missing classes, whether their grades are dropping or they drop out altogether. So we want to be mindful of the things that young people are going through, and I wanted to raise awareness of it. No better time than Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month to give some context and to explain why this is important and how we can help with that. So if there's anyone that you know that needs assistance, be that supportive person that can help them find that. Sometimes it's hard to just ask for help, and so you going the extra mile or already knowing what the local resources are is more helpful than you probably realize. So I appreciate you watching this episode of the Empowered and in Control podcast. Again, I've been your host, Oriana, and I will see you guys next week.